Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is on the very complex mechanics of political transparency, specifically surrounding the estate of Jeffrey Epstein. We're discussing the highly strategic move by Democrats on the House Oversight Committee on December 12, 2025, the public release of just 19 photographs taken from, well, a massive cache of material the committee holds.
And this release wasn't random at all.
Not at all. It landed exactly 1 week before the critical congressional deadline, December 19th, which was set for the Justice Department to release its own comprehensive Epstein files, as mandated by the Epstein Files Transparency Act.
So the core tension here is, I think, pretty clear.
Right. Does the selective disclosure of this tiny fraction of images, 19 out of a reported 95,000, does it primarily serve as a necessary tool for political pressure and public accountability? Or is this action, as many critics are arguing, a politically motivated maneuver aimed, primarily at building a narrative right before the mandated government release?
My position is that this release, while it was certainly calculated, represents a justifiable and frankly necessary mechanism of political pressure and public disclosure. It's what's required to ensure that the administration actually complies with the law. And I come at it from a fundamentally different perspective. I would argue that any release that is so narrowly curated, so perfectly timed, and so devoid of objective context is inherently a political manipulation. This process, by prioritizing sensationalism and partisan targets, it risks undermining the very objective, contextualized understanding of the material that transparency laws are meant to achieve.
Well, when we examine the history of resistance surrounding this material, my position becomes, I think, necessary. The public needs transparency, but the powerful entities involved, and that includes elements within the current administration, have demonstrated a deep, long-standing resistance to providing it freely. The release of these 19 images, which, prominently feature figures like President Trump, former President Clinton, Bill Gates, Steve Bannon, Woody Allen, Richard Branson, former Prince Andrew. It's essential because it visually underscores the vast, just staggering reach of Epstein's influence. We're moving past names on lists and flight logs. We are now seeing tangible documentation of this incredible nexus of global power across finance, technology, politics, and entertainment. The scale of access explains how he was able to operate for so long with impunity. And the timing, to your point, it's not an accident. It's a strategy and a necessary one. A Congress reporter like Haley Fox noted that the intent was precisely to add, quote, some pressure on the administration to release what they have by the December 19th deadline. Given the DOJ's prior actions, including a memo concluding that no blackmail or client list existed, we just can't trust that the full disclosure will be made in good faith without this type of public pressure. This initial volley of photographs forces the issue. It makes it impossible for the administration to quietly redact or minimize the upcoming full government release. And the content itself, including images documenting BDSM gear and restraint warnings placed right alongside photos of powerful men, further justifies the public's right to see the environment Epstein cultivated. Transparency is the bedrock for achieving justice for the survivors who have been denied it for years.
I agree that the administration has been historically resistant, but I worry that that premise grants Congress a moral high ground they haven't earned here. Let's look at the mechanics of the disclosure. When we're talking about 95,000 images, releasing 19 of them cannot be credibly framed as pure public accountability. It's selection by hyperbole. It is, I think, undeniable that this action was designed for maximum media controversy and explicitly aimed at creating a politically advantageous narrative ahead of a comprehensive release. The Republican members of the Oversight Committee were correct in labeling this shameful political theater because the selectivity, it just undermines the very concept of a nonpartisan disclosure. And this isn't just about what they chose to release. It's about what they chose to hide or manipulate. The lack of context inherently distorts the material. President Trump may have dismissed the photos by saying Epstein was all over Palm Beach and had photos with everybody, but the Democratic Committee's actions actually support the idea that the context is being suppressed. We know, for example, that one image featuring Bill Gates and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was demonstrably cropped to exclude King Charles, an individual present in the original Getty image. That is a deliberate graphic act of framing specific, politically salient relationships. The decision to lead with sensational material Images of Trump condom wrappers and BDSM accessories. It proves a priority is not context, but shock value. This approach risks putting immediate political gain above the long-term goal of justice and a comprehensive understanding for the survivors.
That's a fair reading of the selective framing. But we do need to address the central political reality here, which is the motivation. When an administration has previously tried to minimize the scandal, we heard the White House call the file story a Democrat hoax. It validates the use of political leverage as a tool for enforcement. The primary intent is to ensure compliance with the Epstein Files Transparency Act.
But is it just about compliance?
I think it is. When Ranking Member Representative Robert Garcia explicitly states that they will not rest until the DOJ releases all the files, he is framing this action as enforcement, not just narrative creation. This initial release forces the public conversation to remain focused on the deadline and the true scope of Epstein's influence, which makes it significantly harder for the administration to minimize the full government release next week. The photos are a critical mechanism to hold their feet to the fire.
I see the desire for compliance, I do. But does enforcing the law require this level of political targeting? I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the primary intent is apolitical accountability when the selection criteria align so perfectly with maximum political damage. Let's dig into that idea of leverage. The Democrats have clearly been trying to, quote, stoke division among the president's base by highlighting Trump's connection to Epstein. If the intent were pure, nonpartisan accountability, why foreground photos of explicit political targets like Trump and Steve Bannon, especially when many of these associations were already known through flight logs or emails? Including sensational, contextless items like the Trump-branded condoms only confirms the goal is political distraction. And furthermore, we have to acknowledge that political maneuvering is endemic here. The GOP on the Oversight Committee is simultaneously threatening to hold the Clintons in contempt over this investigation. Everyone is using this material for political ends, and this selective release is simply the opening salvo in a partisan battle, regardless of the admirable goal of ensuring the Transparency Act is followed. The leverage being applied is political leverage, first and foremost.
Focusing entirely on the political fallout ignores the substantive shift in understanding that these 19 images provide, even if they don't immediately establish criminal wrongdoing. I agree that simply being pictured with Epstein doesn't prove criminal acts. Haley Fox made that point correctly. But the documentation shifts the narrative from abstract names on lists to a tangible confirmation of powerful men operating within Epstein's sphere. Think about the difference between documentary evidence and visual evidence. An email between two high-profile people about a meeting is, it's documentary proof. A photograph of those two people physically together in Epstein's environment is visual, contextual proof. The visual medium changes the nature of the public's right to know by grounding the abstract names in material reality. It makes the scandal immediate and undeniable in a way that dry data points just can't. And that forces a reckoning with the scale of the power structure.
I would frame the evidentiary value differently. The photos offer low evidentiary value regarding new criminal wrongdoing by the associates, and this has to be the central measure if we are discussing justice. We already knew, for instance, that many of the featured individuals, like Woody Allen, Larry Summers, Alan Dershowitz, were publicly associated with Epstein in prior unsealed documents. What new insight does a picture provide versus, say, an email documenting multiple meetings or conversations? The key distinction is conceptual clarity versus emotional impact. Documentary evidence, like emails or flight logs, gives us conceptual clarity, the dates, the nature of the communication, the intent. Visual evidence, especially highly curated visual evidence, it sacrifices that clarity for shock value. We are asked to process a photograph, often of blacked-out faces likely belonging to victims, without any accompanying explanation. That prioritization of sensational documentation over contextualizing documents is, well, irresponsible. Summers resigned from the OpenAI board over emails. We knew the gravity of his relationship. This selective release prioritizes the emotional impact of an image, say a photo of Epstein in a Harvard hoodie next to Dershowitz, over providing the genuine contextual clarity the full files would offer.
But that visual context, when properly observed, is not just emotional. It provides detail that abstract documentation often misses. You mentioned the picture of Steve Bannon. When you look closely at that photo, he is sitting near Epstein's desk, and on that desk, 2 framed photographs are clearly visible, one of which shows a scantily clad, redacted individual. This isn't just Bannon being there. It documents proximity not just to Epstein, but proximity to suspicious, highly specific material that was visible within his environment. This directly supports a Democratic claim that the disturbing abuse was on full display for all his friends to see. The photos shift the burden of denial. Before, a powerful person could claim ignorance of the criminal activity surrounding Epstein. Now the material itself suggests that the suspicious context was literally laid bare. That is substantive, contextual evidence that merits public attention and pressure. And it is precisely why this initial selection was important.
I agree that the Bannon photo presents a stronger contextual claim than just a handshake at an airport, but it highlights the inherent danger of this process. Congress is acting as the curator of context, essentially telling the public what to see and how to interpret it before the full evidence is available. The question isn't whether it's political. Everything in D.C. is political. The question is, does this specific political maneuver result in a net gain for transparency? And I argue no, because the process itself is being used to apply a political filter. We have to distinguish between ethical redaction, which we both agree is necessary to protect victims' privacy, and manipulative selection and cropping, which is designed to frame specific individuals. The fact that the committee releases these 19 images, knowing the massive internal backlog that staff must take days or weeks to go through the over 95,000 images, demonstrates that the 19 were chosen specifically for maximum partisan effect. It's the classic information dilemma. Do you wait for the full menu, or do you take the highly curated, politically seasoned appetizer right now? I argue that true transparency requires the whole menu, not just the dishes designed to generate the most outrage.
But waiting for the full menu risks the kitchen closing down before it arrives. If the administration, based on its history, delays or censors the December 19th release, then waiting results in zero transparency. The initial release of 19 photos is an interim act of transparency designed to maintain public momentum and ensure the commitment to full disclosure, as promised by the act, is upheld. This interim step provides continuous pressure. It ensures that the DOJ cannot simply bury a comprehensive release next week in the holiday shuffle without adequate public scrutiny. It is an act of real-time accountability that keeps the narrative focused on legal compliance, preventing the powerful from using bureaucratic slowness as a shield.
The problem is that the White House, biased as they may be, accurately accused Democrats of using random redactions, which include selections and omissions, to support a predetermined narrative. When photos of powerful political opponents are foregrounded, and individuals like King Charles are literally cropped out of an original image, the goal shifts from public accountability to narrative control. Transparency conceptually demands releasing the raw, contextualized material. This was a highly refined, curated preview designed to maximize immediate political impact, which fundamentally distorts the integrity of the material itself.
Ultimately, I contend that the immediate benefit outweighs the risk of political coloring. The release, though selective and yes, politically strategic, forced compliance and conversation. It provided tangible, visible documentation that confirmed the troubling network of powerful global figures from technology and finance to politics who spent time with the convicted sex offender. This initial disclosure bolstered the necessary public pressure on the administration to comply with the deadline for the full DOJ files, which is absolutely essential if we are to achieve any measure of justice for the survivors.
And I maintain that the strategic timing and profound lack of contextual integrity in those 19 images demonstrate that this was above all a political tactic that risks contaminating the public discourse. By focusing the public gaze on selected high-profile individuals via sensational visuals, the disclosure prioritizes suggestion and innuendo over the substantive evidence required for genuine, enduring understanding. The intellectual disagreement sharpens our focus here. We clearly see the tension between the public's right to know and the very real danger of that knowledge being manipulated for partisan gain.
What this really boils down to is that fundamental tension in releasing politically sensitive evidence.
how do we effectively balance the public's demand for accountability against the inherent risks of political manipulation and the imperative to protect the integrity of the information itself?
And the material confirms that this balance, when handled by political actors, remains profoundly precarious. The means of disclosure, as evidenced by the strategic use of these 19 photographs, can indeed sometimes obscure the very truth it claims to reveal.